All right. Well, hi everyone. Nalini Goolsarran. Very nice to meet you. I recognize a lot of names and faces here we've met in the space or at other classes. For those of you who have been to some of my classes, I usually do a lecture and a demo. Today, because the time is short and SEO is very technical, it's just going to be a lecture, but feel free to post your questions liberally in the chat. I take them as I go. So don't worry about interruptions or things like that. A little bit more about me, as Felicia said. I own EdgeSpace Marketing. It's a local, I don't like to say agency because it's just me and a part-timer, but we do web development, search engine optimization, and social media management. We work with small businesses and nonprofits, and our goal is to help you get to your customers digitally. And with that, we're going to talk about search engine optimization. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let's get going there. Slideshow. There we go. All right. So when we talk about search engine optimizations, there's so many questions I get all the time. What is it? How do I use it? It's very technical. What are all the things I need to know? And so today I'm going to break it down into what I call the search engine optimization periodic table of elements. It's going to get a little technical at some points. What I suggest with search engine optimization is take what you can from it. Not everything is going to resonate with you. I'm going to cover a whole lot of stuff. And even if you can do 2 to 4 of the things on the list that you see today, it's more than you can, it's going to make a difference, right? Not everybody can do all of these things. I don't even do all of these things for my clients. We do the majority of them. And most of my clients that are self-managing their SEO can do about 2 to 4 things on the list. And it can have a really big impact on your ranking, even if by just trying. So let's just start with from the beginning. What is SEO? How do we get you to page 1 of Google is really the question. Search engine optimization is all about how to get your business ranking above your competition. And that's always the key. Your competition's doing SEO. If you're not actively doing it, you may be ranking on page 1 because of organic results. You might have a really unique name, but for a lot of people, the competition is strong. So how do you do that? So let's talk about how it works. The whole goal of search engine optimization is to increase the quantity and quality of traffic to your website through organic search engine results. So think about how you use Google. When you first go to Google and you type in a search results, at the very top, you're going to have a bunch of results that are all marked as sponsored or paid. I do get asked very often, do you do Google AdWords? What do you think about Google AdWords? My opinion on it, again, this is my opinion. Every marketer will tell you something different. I don't believe in Google AdWords. I believe it's a waste of your money. And if you're going to spend your money as a small business on marketing, there are other areas where you'll get better bang for your buck. The reason for that is Google themselves have said 70 to 80% of people are skipping the sponsored ads and they're going right to the organic search results. So if you were to take your Google ad spend and put it towards SEO work, towards Facebook, Instagram marketing, or even just revamping your website, you're going to get a better bang for your buck than paying for Google AdWords. The other side of Google AdWords is that if you're not an expert at it and you can't configure it as specifically as you need, you're going to spend a lot of excess because you're paying per click. And if you're, an electrician and you're accidentally showing up for plumbers, doesn't matter if they convert it, as long as they click that link, you're paying. So just keep that in mind if you're balancing against SEO versus paid advertising. So here's the thing. When people go to Google, they're looking for information. They're trying to type in words and phrases that'll match them to the right search results. Google is then crawling the internet, taking that information and finding the content that matches that. The information is then indexed and fed through an algorithm that matches your query, right? We always say the internet is forever and Google is always scraping and crawling information. For those in technology space, the new term of reference is called big data. They have lots and lots and lots of data about us, our likes, our dislikes, our favorite things, our families and friends. People like us also think like people like that. And so all of this information is being amalgamated and put out for the consumer. And then again, there are lots and lots of factors that go into search engine optimization. It's up to you to figure out which ones are manageable for you and doable. So now that we've talked a little bit about how SEO works, let's talk about how you can do it. One of the first things you want to do is identify your keywords using Google Trends. And I'm going to give you a taste of what Google Trends look like. You want to configure what's called your on-site and off-site SEO. And again, on-site are things that are visible. Those are your titles. Those are your page content. Offsite are the things that are happening in the background. And those are the things that are technical that you're going to want to pick and choose what you can and cannot do based on your technical capability. And then you want to configure your Google Analytics. So I'm only going to get into a cursory kind of high level of Google Analytics. I'm actually going to look to sign up for the Google Analytics class next week to hear from an expert about how Google Analytics is used. Hold on, I'm trying to grab the chat. I saw it blip. Where'd it go? Sorry, guys. All right. Felicia, I'm sorry. I can't see the chat. Is there a question?
You know what? Why don't we just wait for chat for the end?
Okay, no problem. All right. And then once you set up your Google Analytics, you also want to set up your Google Search Console and submit your sitemap. Everyone is quite familiar with Google Analytics, but often miss their Google Search Console. Google Search Console is going to give you more in-depth information around the actual search queries. And I'll talk quite a bit more later on about your Google sitemap, because the sitemap is you telling Google, this is my website, these are the pages, this is the content on it. And as you change your website, your sitemap gets updated and Google will re-index. If you don't submit your sitemap, you're actually waiting for Google to index it for you. And that could take weeks, months, days, but why put it to chance when you can make Google do it today? And then lastly, this is very, very, very important. Please set up your Google My Business. In the past, Google My Business was only for businesses with an actual physical location. Nowadays, you can actually have a Google My Business for virtual business. So I finally have one. The caveat with this is that you will set up your Google My Business and you have to wait for Google to validate you. I actually have several clients that are waiting months for the postcard with the code. And I think it has to do with the pandemic and how Google must be printing that, because quite a few of my clients are running into an issue where they've created the Google My Business, but they never received the postcard. So if that's you, the only thing I can say is be patient, because there's no way to call Google, but it is important to take every effort to set up your Google My Business. So let's talk a little bit about Google Trends. This is very important. Google Trends allows you to think like your customer. This is a tool that I use often with my clients when we're doing an SEO exercise. Clients will tell me, my clients are searching for X, Y, and Z, and then we'll go into Google Trends and figure out if they actually are. Google Trends is producing real-time results around how people are actually searching. The order of the phrase matters. Commas matter. Like, it's about trying to figure out what it is that people are looking for. In the past, we used to guess. Now we don't have to guess. We can take our guesswork and put some data behind it so that we're using keywords in the right combination to actually reach our clients. So here's an example of using the right keyword. The blue line says web developer. The blue line says website developer, whereas the red line is showing web developer. What you're seeing here, I do get this question often, what is the 100? It's Google's index. It's not an actual number. I think they're basing it on a percentage of time of searches. But you can see if I was coding my website for website developer, that phrase isn't performing nearly as well as web developer. Now, given that I do both, I'm a web developer and I do website development, I would probably use both of these phrases, because you want to vary your phrases as you do your implementation. Google will start to blacklist you for words if you overuse it. So this is helpful to know that there's actually performance metrics against certain phrases. Further down, these are screenshots of the page view on Google Trends. So you can actually see a breakdown around where people are searching. So if you are a geographically specific business, you want to know, like, if you're based right here, like HAYVN is here in Darien in Connecticut. If HAYVN's getting a ton of search results, like if depending on the keywords coming from Louisiana, that's probably not the right combination for you, because you're not trying to reach people in Louisiana. You're trying to reach people here in Connecticut. Now, this is, very important to see where people are interested. For my type of business, I'm less concerned with this, but this is just to show you that you could see even further breakdown around regions. You can also compare the two different keywords to see how they're performing against what's called related topics. At the very top here, you can see that things related to web developer includes salary, and it's two versions of salary. So this tells me this particular keyword is a lot of times related to job searches. That doesn't mean that I don't want to use this on my website. That's for me to use my judgment. But the related questions are really telling me that this is really all about job searches. When I look at the next criteria, which is web developer, you see things like toolbar. So that's a tool that I might use. You still see jobs and schools and programs. So again, sounds like my keyword is slightly off. I might have wanted to look for website development instead of developer. And so that's when I would start to go down what I call the rabbit hole of Google Trends. You can spend hours and days on this, but this is to give you some insights on how you can infer around, am I using the right keywords? So as we get into those factors, right? On site, off site, what does that really mean? Here's what I always tell people. When you think of SEO, think of it as a gaming system where you're accruing points. You get so many points for a Google My Business. You get so many points for even having a domain name. You get more points for having your keyword in the domain name. No one actually knows how many points you're getting for anything. It's all still a big secret with Google. But what we do know is that it all matters. And so this is when, again, when I say pick 2 or 4 things that matter or that you can do, and you will start to accrue the points in the right way. So this is your periodic table of search engine elements. Don't worry about trying to take a picture of this or understand it. I'm going to break down each of these verticals so they make sense and which ones you need to pay attention to and which ones you don't. One thing to keep in mind is that no single SEO factor will guarantee your ranking. They all kind of work in tandem. So here's an example. Having a great HTML title, so those are your H1 titles, won't help if your page has low quality content. To give you a real life example, if I have a title of my page says website development, and then the whole page is talking about gardening, then I have a good title with bad on-page content. Google is trying to relate all the topics because Google's reputation is at stake. They don't want people going over to Bing and other search engine portals. They want you to stay on Google. So they want to make sure that they're providing users with trustworthy, reliable content. So keep that in mind. If you're going to go off topic, make sure that the title of your page matches your off topic. Having many links won't help if they're all low in quality. So what does that mean? There's a lot of people that sell something called backlinks or link farming. If you ever get those results or those inquiries, trash them right away. Those are all scams. You're going to end up on, if you look at the image on the right, you're going to end up in the blocking category. You don't want to get blocked. Google will block you for violations, which is on right next to that, right? Make sure that when you're linking out to websites that the links are valid and that making sure that the links are relevant. So if you're saying, the name of the link says, again, web development, and you land on a page that's talking about gardening, that's called a low quality link. So keep that in mind. And again, having several positive factors will increase your odds of success, but having several negative ones will decrease it, just like in any gaming system, right? Good things get you rewarded, bad things will get you blocked. And Google is very, very keen on violations and blocking. So please be very mindful of link farming, backlinking, those kind of things, because they can get you into trouble with Google. So let's talk about HTML. Everybody hears it. I don't know how it works. You might have a website on Wix. You might have a website on Squarespace. Neither one of those, you're looking at the HTML. You might have a WordPress website where you're also not looking at the HTML. So what does it mean? Within HTML, you have 3 categories, which is the title tag. So just keep, when you're building your website or your web developer is building your website, it's just making sure that anything in the title tag, the big font right at the top, is marked as H1 so that Google knows that's a title. It matches the topic that you're talking about. Your meta description is actually what shows up on Google. So if you're using WordPress, you would use a plugin called Yoast, Yoast. Yoast will allow you to pre-fill that meta description instead of allowing Google to figure it out. If you're using Wix, there's a box to fill that in. And then again, the header tags are, again, as you're going through everything, H1, H2, H3, just making sure that whatever you're using those header tags, you're using them meaningfully. You don't have to get overly creative. And please, please, please don't do this. Do not hide white text on a white background. That will firmly put you in the violations category, and your website will get blocked by Google from a ranking perspective. So just be careful of that, because people do try to use HTML to cheat, and Google's figured it out. When we talk about architecture, this is known as your site architecture, or sometimes people call it the tabs at the top. A lot of my clients call it the tabs at the top. This is your site navigation. So from the very beginning, make sure your site navigation makes sense. This is from a user perspective, much less from a Google perspective. If you have home, about us, services, contact us, you can't go wrong. If you start to get really creative with those titles, just be really mindful of what they are, because you can confuse your user and you can further confuse Google. You don't want to confuse either of those. So that all impacts your SEO. The other side of it is your site crawlable? Don't use Flash. Don't get creative with your building. If you're using a regular builder or page builder, you don't need to worry about this. Google will crawl your website automatically. What Google is doing is taking your beautiful website, dumping it into code, and then scraping the code. It's like reading and indexing everything. This is all happening behind the scenes. It's just a matter of making sure that you're not just doing bad practices when developing. If you're using Squarespace and Wix, you're good to go. If you're using WordPress, just you might want to ask your developer how they're building. Site speeds matter. Faster websites rank higher than slow websites. And that's specifically because users get impatient. You have a total of 7 seconds from the time they click the button on Google or wherever to convince them, meaning the page loads, they've read something and they've got their questions answered, they've clicked a button, they've contacted you, whatever it is. So that's why site speed matters. And then lastly, are your URLs descriptive? And I'll show you an example of what that means in a few, meaning if you're using WordPress, don't make it say page ID 123. It should say things like SEO best practices or things like that. This is really important if you're writing blogs. Make your blog title the same name as your URL, and then all your keywords are right there. So some of those best practices, let me show you what that looks like. So one of the things that you should always do is rename your image files before you upload them. Common file name is this image and a bunch of gibberish. This is particularly when you get an image off the internet, when you get an image from your cell phone and you're trying to upload it, because cell phones have high quality images, but they come out in this file format. Imagine if I uploaded image 535, etc., to my website. Google has just indexed that as gibberish. But if I rename the file name to Digital Marketing Stanford, Google will now index Digital Marketing Stanford. There's 3 keywords right there in the file name. This is a very easy thing that you can do very quickly to help your SEO. The other side of it is change your URL structure. So this is what I was talking about. In these examples, you've got page ID, gibberish numbers. This is the default setting for WordPress. In WordPress, what you're looking for is the permalinks. Change the permalinks to the post name, and that's where it will match the descriptive name of your page. Sometimes you might be testing and you've named it test page 123 or whatever the gibberish name is. Rename it accordingly when you're done testing. So here are some good examples. Services, best practices for SEO. So services might be the name of my services page, and best practices for SEO could be an SEO specific page. It could be a blog, but it has a very descriptive name in the domain name or in the URL. And then lastly, when you're making your title tags, include your location and keywords. Again, if you're geographically specific, like HAYVN is, you're going to want to mention Darien CT in at least one title tag on one of the pages. So here's 2 variations that I use on my website. Digital Marketing Stanford CT, Website Builder United States, because I can reach a national market without having to be Stanford specific. And then lastly, use keyword combinations in the alt tags of image. This is a little technical, but when you upload an image to your website, regardless of the platform, there is a box that says alt text. Be careful how you use this, because you can get into an ADA violation if you use it a little incorrectly. The alt text was originally designed to help folks with disabilities and e-readers interpret and understand what's happening on the website. You can still do that. Describe what's happening in the picture, But like, for example, woman sitting drinking coffee, then put a comma and start to put your keywords in. Separate your keyword combinations by commas. This is a great way, which is like an off-site SEO, to help you get those keywords in. So we talk about links, and I'm going to go through these next few slides a little fast. I'm happy to share the deck later. I just want to make sure we cover everything and you guys have time for questions. So when you talk about your links on your website, you want to count link quality. Google is counting how many outgoing links you have from your website, but it's also counting how many incoming links you have to your website. So for example, I would get a link quality quotient, let's call it that, a quotient, from HAYVN, because HAYVN is a reputable website that I'm teaching a class for, that they've linked to my website. Google is going to associate myself with HAYVN and say, this person is talking about marketing. This is a co-working space that she's teaching a class. She must be knowledgeable, and it would increase what's called my authority points in the system. And so if someone's looking for digital marketing classes, it would further validate me to Google for Google to raise my ranking. There's a little technicalities here around the link text and the anchor text. So if you can include the words within the link, that's a little technical, but again, if the URL was descriptive to begin with, you don't have to worry about it. And then at one point, Google used to count how many links you had going and coming from your website. And this is what we talked about, where link farming and backlinking was a big thing. And Google has come up and realized that people are scamming the system by doing that. So that's not as much of a big factor. But I always tell my clients, especially a new website, if you can have 2 or 3 links incoming and 2 or 3 links outgoing, it's always good. You don't really need a lot, but if you can have 2 or 3 would be good. So a good example is on your About Us page, if you have a LinkedIn bio, link to your LinkedIn bio. LinkedIn is a reputable website. It is going to your profile, and it's going to add credibility to who you are, to Google and to your audience. Social media is important if you have a social reputation. Not every business has a social media presence, but if you do have a social media presence, Google is linking all of that. Remember the big data reference? All of that is part of your big data. Your personal social media along with your excuse me, business social media. So you want to keep that up. Don't slow down your social media just because you built a website. And then we want to talk a lot about trust. I kept mentioning earlier this authority process. What that is Google is trying to figure out, are you trustworthy? Can they show you to their consumer base? Because they don't want to lead their consumer base astray. So you want to build authority points. The longer you've been around, how many people link to you? Are they reputable? Is your content quality content? Are you providing meaningful information? All of these things are one of the many questions Google is asking about you on a regular basis. And then this last one, history, is very important. If you're a brand new website, it's literally the definition of being the new kid on the block. You're going to end up on page 6 because you're brand new. The more you've been around, the more authority you'll have. Case in point, my website is called EdgeSpace MKTG, not EdgeSpace Marketing. That was because 3 years ago, somebody stole my domain, tried to sell it back to me, but I didn't, it was $1,000. I wasn't going to buy it. But I have now spent 3 years building trust and authority on EdgeSpace MKTG. I've since been able to buy EdgeSpace Marketing and I now own it, but I can't rebrand because if I do, then I'm going to start all over. So that's kind of the dilemma sometimes when you think about changing your domain name and moving your website, because you want to make sure that you maintain that trust and authority that you've spent all that energy building up. And then lastly, you want to start talking about personalization. Country, some of this stuff repeats, right? Country, locality, personal history, social, all of these things are factors Google are looking at users. People now search for co-working space near me, and Google is taking your geographic location and figuring out what's nearby. Like if I look near me, there's quite a few co-working spaces, but because I've taught for HAYVN and because I visit the HAYVN website, HAYVN's going to show up first before everybody else. And those are how Google is going to make sure, because Google's going, oh, you've been to HAYVN, you probably want to go there again. Let me give you that one first, right? That's part of what's called your personal history. As a user, Google is looking at my search patterns, things, people, areas that I'm interested in, and trying to give me more of that. And your job is to try to show up in that list. So let's quickly talk about violations and blocking. So here are some questions to ask yourself. Is your website light on content? I actually had a consultation right before this, a new client, we're building a new website about wealth management, and they gave me one paragraph for the homepage. It was 3 sentences long, not even a long paragraph. And I had to explain, I need more, and explaining why I need more, because you need a little bit more information for Google and you need a lot of bit more information for your consumer, but not too much. And Sue can tell you a lot more about keeping your message concise, but specific. You want to use your keywords, but use them smartly. So don't overuse something unnecessarily. Google is taking your content and parsing it through a reader. So it's called a natural reader program. They want to make sure you're speaking to your computer and not trying to speak to their computer. They want to talk to the consumer. Are you hiding content on page to stuff keywords? So this is what I was talking about. Don't put white font on white background, because Google's turning that into HTML, and we'll see that and then, drop you down on the list or ban you. And then lastly, is your page top heavy with ads? Newspapers are the biggest violators for this, where you get to the website, blogs do this too, and there's tons of ads all across the top, and you got to scroll and scroll and scroll to get to the content. Google is dinging you for that. If you've now gone to some newspapers, you've noticed that you'll scroll a paragraph, there's an ad. Scroll again, there's another ad. It's because they've learned to spread out their ads so that Google doesn't ding them. Let's talk really, really quick about analytics and the Search Console so that you can tell Google all about who you are. So this is a very, very cursory view of Google Analytics. As Felicia mentioned, there's going to be an in-depth class next week, which will be really helpful once you get a handle on some of this stuff. But what you're going to get from Google Analytics is insights. Google Analytics isn't about configuring your SEO as much as understanding how people are using your website. And the person teaching next week may actually say something different, but that's how I use it. It's all about how you use it and configure it. You do need to have backend access to your website. So you can't just go get analytics on someone else's website, because you need to be able to configure it. Google has really good tutorials and explanations. You can see here, this is a screenshot from the Google Analytics help site to help you get through the configuration. You don't need a technical expert for this. So here are some examples of how Google Analytics works. So this is a report from my website. Actually, I think this is from the last time I taught this class at HAYVN. So this is probably about a year old. And you can see in a 7-day period, I had 17 users that generated 24 sessions. This is a question I get very often. What does that mean? It means 17 people came to my website, but a few of them came back more than once, which is how you get 24 sessions. This is important. You want to see people coming back to your website. That means that they came once, they were interested, and so they're coming back. And so that's where you want to make sure that you're looking at your numbers. The next important number on this page is your bounce rate. In my opinion, again, my opinion, a 60 or a 70% bounce rate is good. What does that mean? The bounce rate means someone came to your website, they looked around, but they didn't necessarily click any buttons. So people who have one-page websites, their singular landing page probably has a 90% bounce rate because there's nowhere to go. Whereas in my website, I got 62%, which is pretty good. The average duration is 2 minutes. Look how long people are spending on my website. That's not very long. Think about your own interaction. I'm okay with this number because my marketing and my business model is set up that people are coming to my website to validate who I am. They're not coming to research and things that they just want to make sure I'm a real business. They can see some of the websites that I've built, and do they trust me enough to give me the business? That's what they're coming for, or they're coming to sign up for a class that I'm teaching, right? 60. So this number is out of 100%. You want to see a bounce rate around 60 or 70%. The lower the bounce rate, that means the longer people are spending on your website. But it's not, anything lower than 50% it's almost unattainable, right? Because consumers have a very, very low attention span, and it all depends on what type of business you have and what they're doing on your website and why they're there. So here you can also see, this is what they call the traffic channels. So some of the screens have changed since this. This is just to give you an idea of how the report looks. In the acquisition report, you can see where users are coming from. Now, if I were to redesign this, I would change the colors because all these blues look the same at some point. So sometimes I can't really tell. But what this is telling me is that, let's look at on the 12th, I had 5 organic searches. That means 5 people went to Google, they typed in some version of EdgeSpace marketing, digital marketing, Nalini Goolsarran, something, and they got to my website. The other sides of it are coming from social media. They're coming from newsletters. They could be coming from the HAYVN website. Like there's any number of factors. And when you get into the report, you'll see some of this. And actually your search console will give you a deeper dive into some of those insights. Here you could see what time of day your users are visiting your website. For me, this is less important. I don't really care. People are on their website whenever, but your business and your needs may require you to understand where people are located and what time they're visiting your website. This might be good insights for understanding when to do maintenance. So in my case, the best time for me to do maintenance on my website would be 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. on a Saturday because nobody's on my website. So that's what this report's probably good for. And then lastly, you can also see which device they're using. So I a lot of times get clients that are less concerned with mobile, especially the nonprofit clients. They're like, oh, everybody's on their desktop. And I pull this report and they're going, oh my God, everybody's on their phone, right? Because most of us have phones. The pandemic has changed these numbers. Most people are now home, but their kids may be using their computers for school. You might be on your phone. You might be on a tablet. You can also see which page people visit the most. And this was my old website, so some of these, the links are different. But I want you to look at that very last column where it says page value. For those who are actually going to do Google paid advertising, that's the column that's very important for you to understand the value of your page. It's a supply and demand. The higher the value of your page, the more Google is going to charge you if you want to make that your paid advertising. And this is where understanding how that all works comes in. So if you see the page value, it's Google trying to equate how much money they want to charge you to use that site for paid advertising. Now let's talk about the Search Console. We're using this to tell Google about your website. Again, you must have back-end access. This is where you're going to want to submit your sitemap. You can see what keywords you're showing up for, and you can also see if your website has errors. Sometimes, like if you submit your sitemap, you change the page name, you might see that Google says there's an error now. It's because it indexed a page that no longer exists because you've changed the name or you got rid of it. That's not wrong. Just be careful how often you're doing that because Google is checking valid versus invalid links. So here's what a performance report can look like. So as I mentioned, this is from last year. So you can see from the period of August to November, I had 84 web search clicks. And you can see it fluctuates day by day. Some days I had 6, some days I had nothing, but this is pretty consistent. What you're looking for in this report is that you don't have zeros, because I do have a client where she's got 0, and reason being, the website is for nursing tutoring, like people studying for the NCLEX exam. And the competition for all the websites ahead of her are, tutor.com and all the other, they're brokers for tutors. And so those websites are always going to come first. So what we had to do was go out and say, get all of your clients, your friends and family, clicking on the link to give it some authority to start moving it up the list. Here is what I was talking about, that pages with errors. So I had 14 valid pages and 1 page with error. When I looked at the report, it was because I had one of those test page 1, 2, 3s, and I corrected it to a more descriptive URL, which put it in the valid URL space. Here you can see this. Now this report gets pretty technical. Even I don't understand all the details of it. But what you're looking for here is if you really wanted to get into your performance, people are searching. Impressions is how many times you're showing up. So I had 84 clicks and I showed up in 8,000 search results. It's pretty cool that I showed up in 8,000 search results and I only got 84 clicks. Now, if I was somebody that was highly dependent on click from Google in order to get business, I'd probably be concerned about this ratio. I am personally not, because I know that people are coming to my website for different reasons. Something to bear in mind with the total impressions is that you will get double counted. So if you Google EdgeSpace marketing and you see homepage, but then later on you see about, and later on you see services, that counts as 3. And so that number is a little inflated. So again, take all of these reports with a grain of salt and a little bit of common sense too, right? Don't worry about how this is doing if your business is doing well. If your business is struggling, then you might want to look at how this is all balancing out. And then here you can actually see now, of those 8,000 impressions, how many times did I show up? So EdgeSpace, I'm showing up. It's the name of my business. I should show up. SEO agency Stanford. 436 times I showed up in the search results. That's great. No one clicked it. So I don't, and I'm looking at this going, should I feel bad? Should I not? This is where I would start to look into, what does my page content look like? Is there a reason somebody didn't click mine versus someone else? I don't know all these answers. These are just questions to ask yourself as you look at this. I personally don't look at this report because I have a steady stream of business, so I'm not worried. But again, if your business is highly dependent on this, this is where you want to keep an eye on it. And here's where you go to sitemap. If you're on the format for sitemap, there's sitemap.xml, because this was a Wix website. I'm now on WordPress. On WordPress, it's sitemap_index.html. You can easily Google this and just ask, Google WordPress sitemap format, and it'll tell you exactly what your format is. There's instructions on how to do it. The Search Console has actually made it easier for you to do that. So this is very important and very easy for you to do. So to quickly recap our speed lesson on search engine optimization, you want to make sure that your website content, your website code, your backlink building, your visitor tracking, your results from your analysis, and your keyword analysis are all working together. Identify your keywords, configure on-site and off-site SEO, configure Google Analytics, submit your sitemap, and set up your Google My Business. If you can do, like I said, 2 to 4 of the things that I've mentioned today, you'll be in good shape to get moving with your SEO. Questions?
Do you want to stop sharing screens?
Yeah.
And there's a bunch
There
of
we go.
Yeah.
All right, let me see what we got in the chat. How do you access Google Trends, and can everyone access it? Yes. So Google Trends is free. Anyone can access it. You go to trends.google.com and you'll have full access to start playing around with Google Trends. Doesn't buying ads help you get boost on Google search? So technically, yes, but it puts you in the sponsored section at the top. It doesn't actually give you an organic boost. And search engine optimization is all about that organic boost. You want to be number one where it doesn't say sponsored next to your name. If you buy ads, you're going to end up in the top. But remember, 80% of people are jumping down and skipping all of those top that nice space you paid for that no one wants to see. They're going right down to the middle of the page. Will you, and how will you know if Google has blocked your site? You'll only know if you Google it yourself, honestly. And if you just know that you've done something bad, like backlinking, or you have hidden text and things like that. Oftentimes it'll be someone say, I Googled you and I can't find you. And then you'll probably end up Googling yourself and wondering, where am I? Any tips on improving a website that has database driven where most of the content is behind a registration wall? That's a tough one. When you have a paywall and a registration wall or a member area, that information is not going to get indexed by Google. So what you want to do is the pages that are public, do as much as you can with the on-site, off-site stuff. Simple things like, for example, all your images. If you have 20 images uploaded to your website, make sure they all have alt text, make sure they all have qualified names to give you a little boost, because no matter if those images are on the page behind the paywall or behind the membership screen, the images themselves are still being indexed individually. So that's a good place for you to do it. The pages, again, that are public, your H1 tags, your header tags, make sure all of your content on those pages are high quality. That's going to be important. Can you clarify the sample XML for a sitemap? Jennifer, I hope I answered that when I did the dem on the page that showed sitemap.xml. It's as simple as that, sitemap.xml or sitemap_index.xml. It's just going to matter if you have WordPress or Wix or Squarespace. If you type in the wrong sitemap, the Search Console will immediately tell you it couldn't fetch it. So you'll get an error and you'll just have to Google your right format. How often would you recommend submitting your sitemap to the Google Search Console? You actually only need to submit it one time. Google will continuously update it. This was something when I first started learning SEO, I kept thinking, oh my God, I changed my website. I need to go update it. And Google is regularly fetching it. So you don't actually need to submit it unless, in my case, where you move the website completely, then you just want to make sure you submit a new sitemap for where you are. But after you submit it, if you've stayed on WordPress for the last 4 years, just double check it's still there and that Google's fetching it. You can even see in the Search Console the last time it was fetched. So it could have been a couple of days ago. It could have been a week ago. It'll tell you when it was submitted and when last it was fetched. If you have a hidden page on your website, but that doesn't have white type. Is that a disadvantage? And how can you make a page better if you want to keep it up? So for pages that are hidden, if they're password protected, there's nothing you can do. It's just like the paywall and the membership. Google can't index it because they doesn't know your password and it would be considered hacking. If it's just hidden from public, like you just didn't want to publicize it, do all of the on-page, off-page SEO, do all of the work anyway, because Google in the back end is still indexing that. So the same thing you would do for a public page, do the same thing on the hidden page, unless and I would still do the pages behind the paywall because it just depends sometimes on how people's configuration are. Google might be able to index some of it. And make sure you say no robots follow. Yep. You want to make sure you say no follow on your URLs, but just make sure if you're redirecting to other sites, that you describe it well. You know, like we'll say, click here to read more. Maybe you want to say, click here to read more about fill in the blank, so that you're giving some descriptive information for Google to tell their users. On my Google backend, I have both HTTP and HTTPS. Should there be two? The answer is technically yes. So when you first build your website, you're going to have the non-secure URL, which is HTTP, and you also want to tell Google about your HTTPS, especially when you have your SSL certificate. You actually get more points for having your SSL certificate because Google is now mandating that all users, all websites have an SSL certificate, whether or not you are e-commerce. All right, I think that's all of them. Any other questions? And hopefully I haven't left you guys all your heads spinning, because that was, I know, super technical in a really, really fast period of time.